Everyone. Alcione Tavares. I'm the English language teaching consultant and teacher trainer for Cambridge University Press in Rio and Espírito Santo. And I'd like to welcome you all for this webinar. I hope you can hear me well. If you want to participate, please choose the chat box and you can send messages to all attendees. Some of you are sending messages to panelists. If you want to communicate with everybody else who is attending this webinar, please choose all attendees, okay? Feel free to send us questions, your comments. You're all welcome to participate. This webinar is about motivating young adult and adult learners, and I hope you enjoy staying with me for the next hour. Let's start with the question, does motivation make the difference? And if your answer is yes, then my question to you would be how? How does motivation make the difference? This is what we expect to answer during this webinar. How motivation makes the difference. We want to go through these topics. What is motivation? And discuss the two types of motivation that we can think of, and also talk about how we can motivate our students. Well, if we talk about motivation, I think it is a good idea to start by giving a definition to motivation. It would be very nice to hear what you have to say. We have a sentence here, motivation as the desire to do things. But what about you? What is your opinion about motivation? Any ideas? Does anyone would like to contribute? Okay. Okay, we have Luis Rose to help us if you have any problems concerning listening to me. And please, when you type, use all attendees as an option. Okay, some of you say it's about simulation. Thank you. Reasons for taking the course, okay. To make sure that everything we do has a good real of sense in life. Very good. Okay. It's not only desire, but also external things. Very good. Excellent. Silvia says it's drive. So thank you. Thank you very much with all of your ideas. Let's move on. I chose Max de Pree quote because I find this sentence very interesting. Max says, we cannot become what we want to be by remaining what we are. Max de Pree passed away last month at the age of 94. He was the son of the founder of an office furniture company, and he assumed the leadership of the company in the early 60s. From his experience as a large company leader, he wrote his first book called Leadership is an Art, which has sold more than 800,000 copies. Why did I quote his sentence? Because I think that his sentence summarizes his presentation. Yes, motivation is the desire to do things, but it also involves change. If we do not start to change, we are not motivated yet. So that's why I find this quotation quite interesting. We cannot become what we want to be by remaining what we are. And we said at the beginning that we're going to talk about two types of motivation. Any thoughts about what intrinsic motivation would be? Anybody? Okay. Please send to all attendees. If you send to host or panelists, only I will be reading your answer. Okay. Silva Xavier says that it is the one that comes from inside. A person who thinks positively. Internal desire, says Tatiana. Okay, thank you. What about extrinsic motivation? Any thoughts? Any contributions? What would be extrinsic motivation? People around you. That's interesting, Margaret Costa says. Opportunities. Okay. Motivation that comes from outside. Okay. Excellent. So let's move on. Thank you very much for your contribution. Let's move on. We have this cartoon. Professor Hill is giving his students examples of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. He lists candy and prizes as examples of extrinsic motivation, and he mentions confidence and self-esteem as examples of intrinsic motivation. And then one of his students asks, Professor Hill, after a student eats the candy, does that make it intrinsic? So the cartoon shows us that the learner hasn't really quite understood the idea of extrinsic and intrinsic. So let's see the difference between them. As many of you pointed out, intrinsic motivation arises from inside the individual. Examples like the one Professor Hill gave that involves confidence and self-esteem are quite clear in our minds, isn't it? If you are confident, you feel like trying things out. You're ready to participate. You're ready to maybe do something new. If you have a good level of self-esteem, that's the same. Individuals with good level of self-esteem are always ready to try and to change and to move towards something new. Whereas extrinsic motivation arrives from outside the individual. Professor Hill gave the examples of candies and prizes, but we can list many more types of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Examples of intrinsic motivation: interest, enjoyment, satisfaction, autonomy, meaning. And examples of extrinsic motivation: rewards, pressure to perform, competition, compliance, ego involvement. Let's imagine one student needs to give a presentation in front of his or her class. Everybody else will be observing. He or she would like to do his or her best because everybody else is looking at him or her. So ego involvement, that is an extrinsic motivation. We try our best when we are observed. However, it is important to bear in mind that extrinsic motivators can lead to intrinsic motivation. Let's think of a simple example. I go to the doctor and the doctor tells me I have a heart problem. And then the doctor says you need to work out every day, exercise every day. Then I go home and I think, oh my God, I don't like working out at all. I don't want to do it. But then I have these extrinsic motivators called fear of death. I need to do it. It is important for my health. And then I start working out. One very likely result of my activity is that at the end of the day, I may enjoy doing it. So after a while, because I had to have the discipline of exercising every day, I find out that I enjoy doing it. So an extrinsic motivator led to intrinsic motivation, led to intrinsic motivation. When we talk about young adult learners, we have to think of what are the elements or what are the extrinsic motivators that can lead to intrinsic motivation. In other words, we're talking about teaching English. So what are the extrinsic motivators that we have in our hands to help our students not only enjoy but put effort in learning English? Well, we see here a list of extrinsic motivators, and on top of the list, it is us, teachers. Why are we extrinsic motivators? Because we have the power to motivate and demotivate our students. How can we motivate them? In general, good teachers who motivate their learners enjoy their jobs. So when you enjoy what you do, when you enjoy teaching English in general, you have a very good influence on your students. Good teachers have another element that is also important. They have empathy towards their students, and that makes it easier to find out where the problems are, how they can help them, etc., etc. So talking about teachers, I would say that this movie is probably an excellent example of how a teacher can change the life of his or her students. Freedom Writers. If you haven't seen this film, please do. Carla Santos tells us that she watched it and she finds it excellent. Thank you, Carla, for your comment. So it's starring Hilary Swank. This film from 2007 is based on the book The Freedom Writer's Diary by teacher Erin Gruwell, who wrote the story based on Woodrow Wilson Classical High School in Long Beach, California. Teacher Erin saw his students as individuals and helped them find their place in the world. Find and live values that they did not know they were capable of having. As I said, I highly recommend you to watch this film. It is really excellent. It really changes our idea or our way of seeing how we teachers can influence our students' lives. Teachers, we are models. We are inspiration, friendship, influence. And some of us are simply unforgettable. I'm sure all of us can point out at least one teacher that we consider unforgettable. And I would also guess that probably many of us decided to become English language teachers due to influence of a previous language teacher who loved his or her job and influenced us, not only in learning English well, but also in teaching English. Then we decided to become a professional. If we become unforgettable to at least one of our students, I can say that we did a good job. Another extrinsic motivator is the feeling of success. Who wouldn't like to be successful in anything we do? Let's imagine I want to learn how to drive. I start driving lessons. At the end of my course, I want to be a good driver. Nobody takes driving lessons to fail several tests and give up driving. We want success. Whatever we invest for success. It is an extrinsic motivator, especially if we talk about young adult and adult learners. We have that in mind. That investment is in our minds. As teachers, we want to see that our students are learning what we teach them. And as learners, we want to learn whatever we decide to study. In other words, we want to see the results of our investment of energy, money, and time. Successful means strong results. So how can we see results? Or how can we help our students see results when they're learning English? Well, I would suggest a few topics considering results. Materials should be user-friendly. Students must see the results through the materials and lesson by lesson. And the more something in language learning is tried and tested, the better. In other words, if it works, why not try it out? In terms of materials being friendly, a very simple way of presenting new language, it can be a function, it can be grammar, it can be vocabulary, is by using the famous 3 Ps that I'm sure all of us are familiar with. The 3 Ps are presentation, practice, and production. The example we have here on this page is simply the presentation of grammar done by a color panel with a few examples, followed by practical activities. You have exercise A1, A2, and then productive activities, which are exercises B, pair work, and C, classwork. Can I ask you a question? Which one of the 3 Ps do you think is the most important one, in the sense that we need to give special attention when we're teaching? Presentation, practice, or production? Could you write your answers? Some of you, all of them. Production, presentation, practice, the 3 of them. Presentation, to me, is production. All of them, production. One depends on the other, production. Okay. In fact, I'm not sure if there is a right answer to this question. What I can say is, from my teaching experience, I believe that we need to give special attention to practice. Why do I say that? Because as we go teaching English, as we become experienced professionals, presenting content becomes quite easy for us. We know how to teach grammar easily. We give a presentation, close books, write sentences on the board, give explanations, elicit sentences from learners. We know how to do that very well. So in general, we are unlikely to fail while presenting new content. What do I mean by that? Through our presentation, students will understand what we want them to understand. It can be grammar, vocabulary, function, whatever. They will understand it. But then, to achieve the level of a good productive activity, which is pair work, etc., practice is fundamental. And when we look at a page of a book like that, and we look at 2 activities, I present a new grammar topic, I give exercise A1, then A2, and I expect the students to be able to do a productive activity right after that. That doesn't work like that at all. We need to provide a lot of practice. The saying that practice makes perfect is very important in language teaching, because from understanding something to using it, there is a gap, and that gap is called practice. That's why I find not that it is the most important one, but the one that we need to give very good attention, is practice. And by practice, we mean controlled practice. In other words, I will be conducting my students to use what I want them to use. After that, if I give them enough practice, and if they understand the pair work, class work, group work, activity well, they will do it well. They will get good results. So one way of understanding that you are getting good results is doing pair work activity where the fluency expected at your level is reached. There are other extrinsic motivators that we need to bear in mind when we teach young adult and adult learners. And one of them is other topics. Topics must provoke curiosity. Topics, when you teach a foreign language, are extremely important. If you're teaching children, the topics must be adequate to the child's level. If you're teaching teenagers, you cannot bring to the classroom topics that are adult-like topics that adults would like to discuss. We have to bring topics that are adequate to teenagers. And that's true for adult learners as well. We need to think of topics that will help us talk about them and learn something through them. They don't have to be complicated. They have to represent everyday situations, but situations that are interesting. For example, everybody in the world is interested in the weather. Everybody likes to talk about the weather. The weather calls our attention every single day. We want to know what it's like in our city, in our country, in our region, in the rest of the world. So that's a simple topic for beginners or for false beginners, but it's a topic that is relevant for the young adult learner. Another example is, look at this text. Students are invited to read a text and look at the names in the article. First of all, are there any names popular in any of these names popular in your country? And then what similar names can you think of? So in fact, it is a text about unusual names. And we first try to bring it to our cultural reality. Is anyone in Brazil called January, for example? It's not at all a common name in Brazil. But on the other hand, Bruno is okay. We do have Bruno in Brazil. But do we find unusual names around us? All of us do. All of us have examples of unusual names. It's very common that we talk about someone that we've met and we are surprised about this person's unusual name and we make comments about it. So we bring that to the classroom, a simple topic, but we have something to say about it. Another extrinsic motivator that leads to intrinsic or may lead to intrinsic motivation is focus on communication. As we said previously, learners must see successful results. The best way for the learner to see a successful result is by observing his or her production. Can I do this activity? Does it sound natural to me? How am I doing it? At the end of this unit, how much have I learned? So that is one way of seeing that I'm getting good results. We all know how to focus on communication in the classroom. We know that involves activities that learners will do by themselves. Pair work, group work, class activity, role play and games. Pair work, group work, and class activities are activities that in which the main difference is the number of participants. Pair work involves 2, group work 3 to 5. Sometimes we don't have large groups. And class activity involves the whole classroom. We can have a group of 15 students, 20 students, but we bring an activity that involves everybody. We know that role play, we ask students to play roles like we pretend, for example, to be at a restaurant, we have group work, one student will play the role of the waiter, the other students will play the role of customers. But one way of making that activity that everybody is familiar with a little bit more interesting or more challenging, depending on the level of English of the learners, is, for example, to pretend that you have one of the customers who doesn't belong to the country. So let's imagine a group of customers at a Brazilian restaurant, and one of them is not from Brazil and is not familiar with the typical dishes. So it's not only a matter of ordering and taking an order at a restaurant, but it's also a matter of helping a customer who is not familiar with the dishes to understand what they're all about and decide if they want to try it out or not. Playing games in the classroom are very useful forms of communication that brings fun to the classroom. We need to provide our students with conversation models. Conversation models are extremely important because it helps us use everyday language. And it is through the conversation models that we practice different types of functions. This is a simple conversation where after all the explanation of what it's all about, if students have doubts and we talk about vocabulary items if they need to, we can ask them to practice in pairs. And I like this technique that I will suggest you. It is called the look up and speak technique. Look up and speak technique is quite simple. Student 1 looks briefly at the first line of the conversation and tries to remember it. Then student 1 looks up at student 2 and says the line. Student 2 looks briefly at the next line of the conversation, tries to remember it, and then looks up and says it. One thing that happens very often when we ask students to work in pairs with the look up and speak technique is that while student 1 is trying to remember the sentence and student 1 looks up and speaks, student 2 is already reading his or her sentence. It's quite common. And what we want from this activity and what we want from this technique is to help students develop eye contact, sound more natural when speaking, use long-term memory, develop good intonation of English in situations where the conversation, they need to role-play the conversation a little bit to sound more natural. But if I try to sound natural, I say something, and my interlocutor is looking at the book, then the conversation is lost. The activity is not as rich as it could be. So one suggestion I'd like to give you, one thing that I like doing very much, is that instead of asking my students to work only in pairs, I ask them to work in groups of 4. I have student 1 and student 2 practicing the conversation using the look up and speak technique. The other 2 students are supposed to observe and see if they are really being able to look at each other when they speak. In other words, if they are really looking up and speaking. After that, the students who are observing the pair will give them feedback at the end and maybe help them do the activity one more time until they get it right. Then they take turns. The pair that was observing is supposed to practice the conversation, and the other pair observes and gives feedback. That's one way of giving them the power something. It is the learner. It is one student helping the other. It's not me observing the pair, but another pair of learners observing them. So you empower your students, and at the same time, they have more freedom to make mistakes because they are being corrected among each other. And it does work. It does work. It's a very good practice. Another thing is, although we are talking about focus on communication, this is not a productive activity yet. While they're doing look up and speak activities, they are just practicing the conversation. But then, after a lot of practice, you can let them change the lines with personal information. And this time, you turn the activity into a productive exercise, which is quite nice. The last extrinsic motivator that can lead to intrinsic motivation are attractive resources. What do we mean by them? First, we should think of online resources for learners. Learners could practice online for vocabulary, grammar, speaking, listening, and reading practice. They can reach videos, they can play games. So online resources are pretty much interesting as an extrinsic motivator. They can be only self-study online material. If it is only online self-study, you don't need to follow what your students are doing. But you can also have online homework, which is different from online self-study. Online self-study, students work by themselves when they want to. Whereas online homework will involve the use of a platform. You need a learning management system so that teachers can follow what their students do. One nice thing about online homework is that exercises are corrected on spot. So you don't need to spend time, you as a teacher, you don't need to spend time in the classroom correcting students' homework. And you can have a report on the student's progress and score because you are using a learning management system. All of your students are linked to a virtual class that you created previously so that they can do homework and you can see everything that they do. They can see, you have a report of your students' progress. Online homework can also involve fun. So you can give them interactive games as they do online activities. In the classroom, a very good extrinsic motivator that helps teachers and students tend to enjoy a lot are called Presentation Plus. Presentation Plus is a tool that allows you to have everything in one place for classroom presentation. Students can see students' book pages on an e-board or on a TV screen or with a projector. In fact, Presentation Plus represents lots of things in one media. It includes the student's book, workbook, complete audio and video program, video resource book. That's for classroom use. But for teachers' use, you also find on Presentation Plus tools, teacher's notes, complete assessment program, and placement test. So it is full of resources, everything in one resource. That's good for teachers and also pretty much interesting for learners as well. And we need some motivation too, don't we? We need to get positive feedback from our students. Not only our students need motivation, we need some motivation as well. Motivated teachers teach better and get better results from learners. At the same time, motivated learners give teachers positive feedback. Positive feedback keeps teachers motivated, and the cycle goes on and on. How can we get motivated? By having fun with our students, by doing things that they will enjoy and we can enjoy at the same time. Let me give you an example of a fun activity that is simple to use both for us teachers and for learners, and it involves zero preparation. What I mean is that we don't need prep time to do these activities. They are ready-made for us, and they can be pretty much interesting in the classroom. I mean using class apps. There are schools, regular schools, and also private language schools that don't allow students to have cell phones in the classroom, especially if we're talking about children and teenagers. But that's not true if we talk about young adult learners. Young adult learners use their cell phones in the classrooms all the time. And most of the time, they don't use the cell phones for anything related to the lesson. So what we're doing here is trying to have a tool that students are so much familiar with and make it interesting for us and for them in the classroom. They can use cell phones and also tablets. And we can provide students with several activities such as polls, surveys, slideshow photos that will prompt more speaking in class. And they're very simple to use, and at the same time, it doesn't mean any preparation time from us, teachers. It's quite simple to use. So let's see how it works. First, teachers have different types of activities that what I just said, right? So the teacher only needs to choose one activity. According to the activity, this is an example of a class survey. The teacher sends students a question. So the class survey here is about a favorite color. So this is for beginners. The question is, what is your favorite color? And we see different students answering green. Then the answer of all students' answers will be shown in teacher's cell phone. Okay, it's not true that everybody says green. You will have different answers, of course. Some of your students will say blue, green, yellow, and then from students' answers, you start discussion. You can also give learners activities that will involve typing. For example, do you prefer to shop online or in stores? What do you like to buy? And then the learner is asked to type his or her answer. And the teacher will get individual learners' answers in his cell phone. Elisa says that I prefer to shop online. I like to buy books. Kate says, I prefer to shop in stores. I like to buy, I can't read it well. And Betty says, I prefer to shop in stores. I like to buy clothes. So students different answers to give teachers and learners the opportunity to talk about them. So very, very simple to use. We started this presentation talking about motivation, and we said that motivation is the desire to do things. We pointed out that it's not only feeling like doing something, but actually doing it. So it involves change. We also said that there are two types of motivation: intrinsic motivation, which arises from inside the individual, and extrinsic motivation that arises from outside the individual. Talking about extrinsic motivation, we pointed out that there are extrinsic motivators that lead to intrinsic motivation. Once learners start doing something and they see results, they may, even if they at first don't enjoy doing it, they may start enjoying doing it. So that's what we want. Interest. Remember the list of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation involves interest, involves enjoyment, satisfaction, autonomy, meaning. So you're doing something that is meaningful to you. So we are thinking of these extrinsic motivators to lead to these intrinsic motivation that we mean by enjoyment, interest, etc. So that's what we want at the end of the day, that they study English because they enjoy studying English. They find it interesting. They find it meaningful, etc., etc. So these are the motivators, extrinsic motivators that we pointed out: teachers, success, curiosity-provoking topic, focus on communication, and attractive resources. This webinar is being recorded, as you can see, and if you have any colleagues who haven't had a chance to attend the webinar today, and they want to watch the recording later on, it will be available in Cambridge University Press YouTube channel, and that will be available a week from now. So in a week's time, you can go to this address and go to the playlist. You will find webinars, and not only this one, but all the webinars that we are announcing for this month of September and October will be available there. I'd like to see from this point if you'd like to ask any question, or if it is okay, if you got it, if you understood it. Any comments? And thank you, Tiana, for your comment on interesting material. Mayara as well. Great content, Mike. Mayara said was very interesting. Thank you very much. Mike says, very well explained. Thank you. Douglas says, thanks for the presentation. Christian is also thanking. Thank you all. I'd like to thank you all for being here, for participating, for providing feedback. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed and you found it useful. So see you and take care. Bye-bye.